to carry. Therefore, they had to just jam the black parchment into the rest of the other things. And then, a final service woman handed a piece of paper to Hazama. "Oh, there's this. After all the awards and praise you've received, if we just punished you, it would look badly on us. Therefore, you have a new assignment. First Lieutenant Itami, I name you a Special Region Resource Investigator. Resource Investigator. Your job scope will be to run around the special region and find us useful resources. Was this not what you always wanted? Well, yes. Once your suspension is lifted, go do your job." "Yes, understood, sir." Hazama patted Itami on the shoulder, and then he left, along with his train of female officers. Itami was left alone, carrying a huge pile of things in the center of the room. The others treated him as invisible once more, going back to their work. However, this time, some of them were secretly smiling, while others were glaring jealously at Itami. Both responses made him uncomfortable. "Ah, sorry about that." As though on Itami's command, jealous voices from all around him shouted, "You bastard," followed by a hail of thrown documents. Spellnago Shrine. When Itami asked her that question, Rory smiled thinly. "That's a shrine of Hardy." Itami was in the co-driver's seat of Risa's van, and he raised his eyebrows when he heard Rory's answer. The scenery of the Kanto region's outskirts sped past the window, and there were fields and gardens among them. There were few vehicles on this road, and at the junction for agricultural vehicles, a tractor was kicking up dust devils as it drove on. "Do you want to go?" The black letter from the shrine was an invitation for Itami. When Rory asked him, Itami shook his head. The gods of the special regions were beings which could not be judged by standard logic. He had no idea what they were up to, so Itami wanted to avoid their schemes as much as possible. However, Rory said that she wanted to go. "This is an invitation they sent, so we can march right in, bold as we please, into Hardy's territory. My plan is to say, I don't want to be your wife, and then ask her what she's up to."
You must be stunned and at a loss for words. Understandable. It is I, after all, Fontaine's most beloved star, Verena. I'm on a very tight schedule, so you're lucky to even get an appointment with me. Oh, hey there. More speed.
Knights and aristocrats share the same cultural heritage, but...
The Lindell campus is near Belnago. If you're going there, so am I, Lele said. She had already published her thesis and was applying for a position as a sage. Kato-sensei allowed Lele to skip past the savant stage and directly apply to be a sage. Tuka said cheerfully. Becoming a sage meant that one was a keeper of great secrets, and it implied that as a wizard, they were ready to become a master in their own right. Although Lele was probably the youngest ever to apply to be a sage, a magician who could aid in the defeat of a flame dragon had no business being a mere apprentice, and so Kato agreed. I will personally witness the moment Lele is acknowledged as a sage. Tuka's words reflected everyone's wishes. If I have the chance to go to Belnago Shrine, I plan to inform the goddess of my will. Therefore, Your Holiness Rory, I have a request of you. I know, but is it really all right? Of course. What's the matter? Tuka asked, and then Yao smiled and answered. I plan to change my name, Yao Ha Duchei, daughter of Dihan, of the Duchei tribe, of the Swartz Forest, to Yao Ro Duchei. Iwa. Tuka said, her eyes wide. I don't quite get it, Itami said, a confused...
unknown god?
Outlanders, your journey ends here. Who are you? The sustainer of heavenly principles. The arrogation of mankind ends now.
Give my sister back! And just like that, the god took away my sister. Some kind of seal was cast upon me, and I lost my power. So while we used to travel from world to world, we are now trapped here. How many years ago was it? I don't know. But I intend to find out. When I woke, I was all alone, until I met you 2 months ago.
Yeah, Paimon really owes you for that. Otherwise, Paimon likely would have drowned. So Paimon will do her best to be a great guide. We should head off. Let's get going!
Is this an answer from this world?
Look on his face. Tuka explained to him well, for instance, my full name is Tuka Luna Marso. Luna refers to the god of music, Lunar Yuer. This means that I venerate Lunar Yuer as my god. I see, then, what does Ro mean? It refers to her holiness, of course. I don't think a demigod has ever had worshippers before. Well, rather than praying to a blind and deaf god, the demigods not only can hear their believers' words, but they can respond to them, so they are more worthy of worship. Yao thrust her chest out as she said that. Then, Rory, when you ascend to divinity, what kind of god will you be? Itami already knew the answer to Yao's question about Rory. This time, it was Rory's turn to answer. Emroy governs death, judgment, madness and war. Her apostles can carry on her portfolio when they ascend, or they can take a portfolio nobody is in charge of, or become the guardian deity of a certain domain. Well, then, what sort of domain will Rory take charge of? Death? War, maybe. Judgment would work. I personally think madness would suit her style. As everyone started with their wild guesses, Rory lowered her head and blushed before quietly giving her answer. Apart from Risa, who had no idea what they were talking about, her answer froze everyone else solid. Oi, what's with you guys? Risa turned behind to ask what was going on with them, but they all stayed still. Although Risa felt this was all a bit ridiculous, if the driver had frozen up as well, there would have been a traffic accident, so this was actually a blessing in disguise. Then, the answer which affected everyone so badly was love, is that so wrong? And so, we're here. Itami got off the vehicle when he heard Risa's voice. They were in a patch of agricultural forest, and a medium-sized hospital building came into view. It looked old from the outside, and it would seem it had only 30 years left in its life. Perhaps if one could endure the age of the building, it might be a relaxing place. Itami Dano's Okasama lives here. Yuji's mother. My father's mother, should be my grandmother, then. Mother-in-law. Itami could not find it in himself to take a step forward. Now, Toka pushed him go see her. Now, Toka had forgiven Itami for pretending to be her father, and also for dragging her to go exterminate the flame dragon, but the condition was to go see your mother. Of course, Itami had pretended to be Toka's father for her sake. Still, he felt guilty about that, and it was messing up their relationship. Therefore, Toka used the excuse of my conditions and your punishments are two separate things. She gave her own punishment to Itami, because she felt that was the only way they could remove the gap between them. Itami was also aware of what she was thinking. However, the thought of meeting with his mother made him uneasy. I got it. Itami took a deep breath as he said that. However, his cowardly...
Okay, let's...目指すは七天神像。この世界にいる七柱の神のうちどれを探してるんだ？神をかたどった像は七神の象徴としてこの大陸に点在してるんだ。7つの元素の神のうちこれは風を司るものだな。お前の探してるのがこの風神の領ほら、言葉は歌となり風と共に流れるだろ。その中に きっと妹さんの情報があると思うんだ。もちろん神が答えてくれるかはやってみないとわからないけどな。よし、急ごう。おい、どこに行くんだ。オイラのところに来てくれ。そのまま泳げるぞ。
Attitude toward this annoyed the impatient Risa, to say nothing of Tuka, Lele, and Rory. The latter three each kicked Itami in the butt, with a "just go already" look on their faces. Note the BGM 71 TOW, 2 Blanched, optically tracked, wire-guided, missile is an anti-tank missile that uses thin wires to steer it in flight.
どうだ？この世界の元素を感じたか？どうやらお前は心臓に触れるだけで風の元素力を手に入れられるみたいだな。この世界の人が力を得るにはお前みたいに簡単じゃないんだぞ。うん、だってお前はこの世界の人じゃないからな。ここから西へ行くと自由の都モンドに行けるんだ。モンドは風の都市で七神の中で風神を祀ってるんだ。心臓から力を得られるお前ならそこで神の手がかりを入手できるかもな。それとモンドには銀融詩人がたくさんいるから。よし、この世界の元素
風神はあ消えるんだ。
これは七天神像にもらった風元素の力だ。はあ、おいらもこんなかっこいい戦い方ができたらな。
Tuesday, January 12th, 2016 Gate, thus the JSDF fought there. Volume 4 Chapter 17 Translator, Nigel Editor, Pervy Sage Chuck, Nate, Skithwood. The girl wore a set of white goth clothing. She looked to be around 20 or so. Her deep blue skin was covered by lace-edged white cloth. A pair of firm, perky breasts swelled from her chest and pushed against her clothes, and the space from her cleavage to the shiny belly button piercing was displayed for all to see. The clothes on her torso were held together by lace tapes, which compressed and bound her exposed flesh. The sleeves of her clothes seemed to have been torn off, while the white skirt of her clothing was torn and tattered. Her skirt was designed to show off the full length of her luscious legs. The skin of her belly, her arms, her legs and her face were covered in tribal tattoos. There seemed to be some significance to them. Perhaps her whole body was tattooed. The girl had a head of thick, white-gray hair, and her gold pupils were slit vertically and gleamed with an eerie light. She rested the shaft of an enormous scythe on her shoulders and licked her lips. She resembled a yakuza resting his sword across his shoulders, down to her confident, imposing attitude. When Itami realized the situation he was in, he had the feeling of impending doom. She seemed ready to rush out at any time and kill everyone around her. Oni-sama, you're the bride-to-be of my master, letting a filthy human casually touch your body is too Karel-ak. Perhaps she was not used to speaking politely, but she nearly bit her tongue, and then she muttered, damn it. What a pain, who'd want to be a wife to that woman? As Rory grumbled, she tried to stiffly raise her trembling body. After rejoining the cut surfaces of her severed arm, her blood-stained limbs could move at last. However, she still could not use her strength. The halberd which she would normally swing about like a matchstick needed all her strength just to hold in her hand, to say nothing of raising it. Aren't you glad to meet my mistress, Oni-sama? How many times have I said this already? My god is Emroy, who rules over death, judgment, madness and war. Ha, is this what they call marriage blues? How sad. After that, she added a dangerous pronouncement. At the end, as I thought, I'll need to bring you back by force. What do you mean? Thursday, April 14, 2016 Gate, thus the JSDF fought there. Volume 5 Chapter 1 Translator, Nigel Editor, Pervy Sage Chuck, Nate, Skithwood. By the time the flame dragon's head was placed upon the gates to the imperial capital, it had been several months since the earthquake, and in the meantime, the fear in everyone's hearts had slowly faded away. The flame dragon was a force which could not be resisted by humanity, and people the world over considered it a natural disaster, much like an earthquake. Therefore, all people could do in the wake of the tragedy which the flame dragon brought was sigh and mutter, such misfortune. They felt it was sent by the gods to torment humanity, much like floods and hail. This attitude of helpless acceptance was deeply rooted in people's hearts. Of course, people had tried to protect themselves against such disasters. Much like how measures could be taken to protect against floods, many heroes who had tried to slay the flame dragon had appeared. The key word was tried. Until now, nobody had succeeded. Those heroes might have been weak, but they did not lack for either courage or motivation. The only thing they had done wrong was that they had lost. It would not be an exaggeration to say they could never have won. And because of that, there were two main opinions when it came to the rumors of the men in green chasing off the flame dragon. Some were filled with hopeful expectation while others were dubious, and a brewing tension filled the air between both camps. These rumors were spreading in the countries allied to the Empire, let alone within the Empire itself. And so, today, the symbol of terror and despair, the flame dragon's head, now adorned the imperial capital's main gate, for everyone on the streets to behold. Just being able to drive off a flame dragon was impressive enough. Now that the proof of the flame dragon's death was before their eyes, it had a powerful impact on everyone who saw it. Their reaction could be described as awestruck or even dumbfounded, though a more objective description might be that they stared with eyes wide and mouths open. Usually, when an enemy army was defeated, a castle was conquered, or when a hated foe was slain, the people's hearts would be filled with a fierce joy, and they would cry out in excitement. However, the being called the flame dragon was so powerful that it seemed unrealistic that someone could actually kill it. Now that they saw the flame dragon's head, separated from its corpse, all they felt about this was confusion. In any case, the lack of excited action or cheering could be due to the shock which filled everyone. That said, it did not mean they were unmoved. Their reaction could be described as a dormant heat. For instance, a wildfire burned hot and strong, but if left alone, it would quickly burn itself out. In contrast, the people's feelings were like how boiling magma would flow everywhere without being exposed to the light of day. If someone cast a flammable object into it, a great fire would blaze up in an instant. High city walls surrounded the imperial capital. The southern face of the walls was where the imperial capital's main gate was located, in the form of a pair of well-fitted double doors. The south gate was jammed up by those people who had come to see what the fuss was about. Every single location in sight was filled with people, be it the streets or the windows of nearby buildings, and some people had even climbed onto the roofs in order to see the flame dragon's head. Everywhere, one could see people moving back and forth, to the point where they were rubbing shoulders against each other and treading on their neighbors' feet as they moved. Fortunately, there was no large-scale disturbance or panic. As they looked at the dragon head, they froze and watched with their mouths wide open, hardly daring to blink as they let this incredible fact wash over them. Shortly after that, the people began whispering to each other. Who could have done something amazing like this? Was there a poster or did anyone say anything? After all, there was no mass media which could swiftly inform people of facts. When people wished to show or declare something before the masses, they had to put up a plaque or a poster with their desired message. Otherwise, people would not know what had happened or who had done it. For instance, some charlatan might jump out and declare "I did this," as the people were busy discussing the matter. However, there had been no announcements or a bill posted. All the audience could do was look at the flame dragon's vast head. Who had done this? And what sort of massive battle had that person fought to obtain an achievement like this? Nobody answered the crowd's doubts and questions. This magnificent trophy before them was a silent witness to the monumental victory that had been won. That silence was more convincing than any amount of words. Humans were a race that came up with their own theories, explanations, and conclusions, and then sought people to agree with their findings. That being the case, the speculation started at once. Some people said, "I think only the men in green could do this." What do you think? By the time the Emperor announced the slaying of the flame dragon, that news had already been making the rounds on the streets. Slightly earlier, the Emperor considered that this might be a matter of national security. In order to make a judgment call on this issue as quickly as possible, this news raced up the reporting chain to the Emperor. However, that method resulted in the widespread circulation of rumors. Almost everyone who heard the news wondered if their ears were working. After that, various ruling nobles sent envoys or even went in person before the Emperor to verify the truth with him. The dragon's head had appeared on the south gate in the morning, and by the time the highest authority in the empire, Emperor Molt Sol Augustus, released an official statement, it was evening. Emperor Molt simply said, "Is that so?" after hearing the report from Count Marx, the head minister of his cabinet. After that, he gave an order: dispatch troops to disperse the crowds, and have the head on the city gates brought into the imperial palace. Your Majesty, did you know about this beforehand? Count Marx was surprised by the Emperor's calm reaction to this news, hence his question. It seems the canaries in the palace are starting to get uneasy. In the face of that, I have gathered my resolve. I will not be perturbed no matter the situation. The defeat of the Imperial legions, the sudden earthquake, the collapse of the Senate building, all these frightening events had occurred recently, one after the other. Perhaps it was because of these events and the promise of future ones like it that the Emperor said he had gathered his resolve. Still, his attitude toward bad news was quite surprising. Therefore, Count Marx was deeply disturbed as he stood before the Emperor. "I see. The news of the flame dragon's demise has flustered some people. But this is not in itself a bad thing. Being able to eliminate a disastrous entity like that is a cause for celebration. But it seems the situation is not as simple as you say. I understand. The slaying of the flame dragon is a feat that has never been accomplished before and may never be done again. It is a feat comparable to a single soldier defeating an army or taking a castle. Should that dragon's slayer report his name, they will receive ample praise and compensation regardless of their origin or species. But that person has not yet come forward, which I cannot understand. It would make sense if that person was humble, but then why would a humble person put the creature's head on display? It is a contradiction I cannot resolve. Indeed. That person's motives are unknown. Still, there should be some way for us to understand his actions. But perhaps I am thinking too hard, and trying to see something where there is nothing. If this person intended merely to inform the people of the flame dragon's death, Count Marx, I hereby charge you with investigating who was the person who hung the dragon's head on the gate. If we can find out who did it, even if that person's intentions are hard to grasp, we should still be able to gain a clue regarding them. Count Marx bowed with an understood before leaving, with the intention of investigating as swiftly as possible. However, the Emperor called out to him before he could leave, and he turned back to the Emperor once more. May I serve you in some way? Call Peanut to me. Peanutano, you mean? From what I know, she is currently entertaining the ambassadors from Neon. Shall I summon her immediately? While a summons from the most exalted ruler of the empire should be obeyed immediately, the person being summoned was carrying out an important duty of the state. So, should she be summoned, or not? Count Marx was waiting for that answer. And then the Emperor changed his mind, and waved his hand as he continued speaking. Oh, that's right. Tonight we celebrate the return of our countrymen. I should have attended that event, but I forgot. Your Majesty, may I know what matter requires Peanutano? If the need is great, I could. Never mind. I will see her again at the celebration tonight. We can talk then. If it pleases your Majesty, could you enlighten me with regards to your intentions? In truth, I intended to ask her about a report concerning the men in green. The report stated that the men in green drove the flame dragon away from a village. I had thought it to be a joke at first, but things being as they are, I feel it is worthy of further investigation. From the looks of things, could it be that these people exterminated the flame dragon? Count Marx looked profoundly disturbed as he said that. Who are these men in green? Which country do they hail from? We must investigate this matter thoroughly. Then, I shall entrust you with that task. Count Marx dipped his head in respect while replying, understood in a suitably deferential tone. Then, he muttered the words "men in green," as though to carve them into his heart. At this moment, the luncheon to welcome the Japanese ambassadors was about to begin in the southern palace of the imperial capital. It was organized by Princess Pina Colada. In attendance would be various ministers, important senators, military figures, patricians, as well as their accompanying spouses and daughters. According to the empire's practices, if a foreign ambassador was present, they would be formally welcomed regardless of whether their nations were at war with each other. Otherwise, the subsequent talks and negotiations would not be officially recognized. Since this was the most important part of the process, the emperor would speak words of welcome to the visiting ambassadors, which was in effect a formal guarantee of protection and free movement for the foreign ambassadors during their time in the empire. After that, the foreign contingent could begin mingling with the imperial diplomats. And then, the Japanese had chosen to politely refuse this invitation. The reason was because both sides had already done battle with each other, and the specter of the Ginza incident loomed behind both sides. In addition, the hostage return was not yet completed, and the Japanese government felt that treating each other as friends at the current moment would not be appropriate. Therefore, Princess Pina came up with a solution that satisfied both sides. She organized a luncheon in her own name. After the luncheon, the guests from both sides would move to the adjacent hall, where a celebration would be held to welcome back the released prisoners. In this way, the Japanese would have a reason to be there, for the return of the prisoners. After that, the emperor would show up in person to meet the Japanese guests. It might have sounded surprising that the willingness of people to attend an event could change depending on what it was called. That kind of thinking could be considered laughable and pointless, from a certain perspective. It was because of this pointlessness that adults needed excuses like showing off and presents in order to show up to these occasions. However, the fact that people could think of these occasions as laughable and pointless was a sign of prosperity. Only a developed and mature society had the luxury of thinking of events in that way. Even without reams of rules and regulations, people could respect each other's boundaries and live while understanding each other. After all, in an undeveloped society, people would scoff at these values, perhaps even ignore them entirely, and life in that society would be chaos. For example, it would be like a student at school being bullied and looked down on by their peers. One could imagine the final result of that. Phenomena like these existed in the international community. In order to live in peace, one needed something to be proud of and which others could respect. Therefore, even the pointless things described above would prevent the seeds of future conflict from being sown. That was diplomacy. Unlike interpersonal relationships, there was no room for error in international diplomacy. This extended to the peace talks as well. Although the objectives of both sides was to reconcile differences in opinion and clear up contradictions, since the talks would involve the reputations, traditions, and customs of both sides, among other things, it made the process of these talks very complicated and troublesome. However, a diplomat's job was dealing with these problems and achieving a common understanding with people who were troublesome, but who had something worth trading for. In order to ensure both sides could come to a common understanding, even those pointless things as mentioned above might become part of a scheme. With that in mind, the composition of the diplomatic party from Japan became obvious. For example, there had to be around 20 politicians among the personnel going to the imperial capital, as well as several colonel-grade military officers, as well as a certain councilwoman called Shirayuri Raiko, who was Japan's representative. Her job title had been changed from Prime Minister's aide to Vice Minister for Special Region Problem Countermeasures. This was done in order to address the arrogance of the empire. Said arrogance was best expressed as, since no other nation is our equal, a senator from the empire is automatically superior to a senator from any other country. The fact that she was present was a form of countermeasure employed against the imperial diplomats, who were used to being arrogant and patronizing to their foreign counterparts. The empire did not have female ministers. When a female emissary came to the empire, the assumption was that she must be some form of royalty. According to courtly etiquette, someone like her would be below the emperor and the imperial household, but she would be above senior politicians and officials. This time, the Japanese delegation had chosen personnel in defiance of the Empire's usual practices. In response, the Empire decided to lower the quality of their reception in terms of etiquette, dress, and so on of the Japanese by one grade below the highest possible level. In other words, the Japanese contingent's welcome would be slightly poorer than the Empire's highest standard, in order to preserve a sort of equality. The preparations for all of these could be attributed to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs official Sugawara Kauji. Currently, he was introducing the key figures to Vice Minister Shirayuri, as though he was showing off the fruits of his diplomatic labors. This is Lord Cicero, a member of the Senate. Well met, Vice Minister Dano. I had not expected the representative of Neon to be a female. May I ask if there are many female ministers in your land? No, there are not many. Even in my country, the politicians are usually male. Thus, being able to hold your position must imply formidable ability on your part. You flatter me. In truth, I was somewhat worried about taking this position. Her words made Cicero think of their earlier defeat, and he smiled bitterly. It seems we have been completely deceived. I was thinking the same thing when I met with Sugawara Dano, but it seems that the people of your nation are overly humble. Please be merciful to us on the negotiation table. After they had exchanged the minimum basic pleasantries, Cicero beat a hasty retreat. With that, the imperial diplomatic offensive was concluded. In accordance with Japanese protocols, Vice Minister Shirayuri Raiko wore an evening dress which was not fancy but yet not plain. In accordance with imperial traditions, she lounged on a large couch. "It's strange, this place," she said to Sugawara in a tone that might have been taken as a complaint. Sugawara explained, "We have no choice but to use the enemy's capital as the place for negotiations. Do consider the speed of their communications. Normally, we would have begun talks in a neutral country, but given that the Empire uses horse couriers to pass messages, just about any disturbance could be used by them to send out a messenger to buy time." Shirayuri replied, "That's not what I mean, though those last words seemed somewhat ambiguous." Then she looked at the patrician ladies nearby. The way they dressed like Japanese people was quite surprising. As an example, the upper crust of European society had been influenced by movies and television shows recently. Once a culture reached its peak and flourished, all sorts of strange and wondrous trends might emerge. For instance, people might wear big hats that made others ask, "Isn't it heavy?" tied with ribbons that made people want to ask, "What are those for?" as well as hairdos that were several times bigger than one's head. And then there were designs which were unnaturally revealing, which showed off the curves of the body, and there were even outfits which resembled tropical birds. Vice Minister Shirayuri's son frequently watched anime, and these people looked just like the characters in those shows. I heard that the formal wear of males in the Empire was Roman togas, so I assumed that their women's clothing would also be in the Roman or Grecian style. In truth, only their host, Princess Pina, had met her expectations, which confused her even more. Normally, there should not have been such sudden changes in fashion. At the very most, there should only have been slight variations from the basic styles. But given the two strikingly different styles before her, she was quite curious as to what had caused this to come about. Fortunately for Sugawara, Shirayuri was only voicing her doubts, and not asking for a proper investigation. The changes in imperial fashion were result of contact with other cultures, and in a way, Sugawara was somewhat responsible for this. That being said, explaining the true nature of cosplay to the ladies of the Empire would be difficult even for someone like Sugawara. Sugawara-sama? Can women become ministers in your country? The welcome party organized by Pina had successfully concluded, and right after that, the next event was about to begin. In the Japanese context, it would be like an after-party following a wedding. Unlike the previous welcoming party, the atmosphere of the next event was much more relaxed. People chatted and enjoyed fine food and drink, and the sounds of joy and laughter rang through the air. As expected, everyone had been wound up after the stiff lunch party for the ambassadors of the enemy. In contrast to that, the purpose of this second party was to celebrate the return of 15 patrician men, who had been thought dead. The gathered family members lost themselves in the revelry, and it was only natural that the atmosphere was one of jubilance. Because of that, the Japanese contingent seemed somewhat out of place. The delegates gathered in a corner of the room, sampling the food laid out on the nearby tables and exchanging notes about the key figures in the empire as they awaited the emperor's arrival. Just then, a voice called out in greeting to Sugawara. Sugawara had been busy with translation duties and making introductions since the start of the previous party, and he was taking advantage of his spare time now to catch his breath. However, shortly after that, he was startled by that voice, and he was certain that the owner of that voice should not have been here. His head began to ache as he slowly turned back to look at the source of that voice. Standing by herself was the heiress of House Tuori, Sherry-san. This young lady had just celebrated her 12th birthday several days ago. She was cheerful and adventurous, and her big round eyes made her look adorable. This girl tilted her head and smiled mischievously at the obviously startled Sugawara. In the past, Sugawara had given Sherry a necklace of small pearls. That necklace now adorned her neck. In addition, she was wearing a dress which covered her whole body and made her look like a flower. The way she was trying to doll herself up and look like an adult was quite amusing. Sherry-sama, not tonight. Sugawara turned away as he said this. As a member of the Japanese delegation, he was wearing a tuxedo. Just then, someone tugged on his sleeve. Please don't be so cold. I know you're not interested in a young girl like me, Sugawara-sama. However, in 4 years' time I'll be a woman in my own right. Until then, I'm going to work hard to make myself into a woman who fits you, Sugawara-sama. So, please be kind to me. Treat it as a future investment. Then, next up. Why don't you introduce me to that lady minister of your country? Sherry's eyes shone from her smiling face. She was confident that she would not be refused. Just then, Sugawara was started to feel dizzy. Even if she had boldly come over and spoken intimately to him. Sugawara could not treat this girl coldly, because she was a valuable connection to Marquis Castle. At first, he had thought his role to be that of a babysitter, but a misunderstanding had occurred somewhere and changed something in this girl's heart. Since Sugawara was not good at looking after children, he decided to learn from Professor Higgins in My Fair Lady, giving her guidance on how to speak and act as well as teaching her Japanese. Perhaps that was what had caused the problem. That said, to Sugawara, girls of her age changed their minds at the drop of a hat. At first, he had thought Sherry's parents would not seriously consider this sort of thing, so he thought of maintaining a respectful distance to cool things between them, which might solve the problem. However, the Tuori family had exceeded his expectations. When Sherry had made her feelings known, Marquis Castle, who was her caretaker, immediately named Sugawara as a candidate to be his future nephew, and began to take him seriously. The reason for that was simple political considerations. At present, House Tuori did not have rich lands, nor did they count any capable officials or up-and-coming soldiers among their family. In order to improve their present circumstances, they would have to improve their ties to Neon and make their presence felt in the diplomatic arena. The surprising thing was that this idea was not the brainchild of the house's adults. It was Sherry who had listed the pros and cons of the plan on her own accord in order to convince her father to support her pure love. In addition, Sugawara was nearly 30 years old. As an elite diplomat, his future was worth watching. Ever since he had begun working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, his objective had always been to reach the highest ranks of that ministry. However, the ridiculous notion of becoming a new son-in-law of House Tuori, and that his intended wife was going to be a 12-year-old daughter of a nation over 1,000 years behind Japan, was not only unheard of, but would actively hold back his career. In addition, it could be considered a crime, and Sugawara had no interest in young girls. Therefore, he refused to have anything to do with this mess. From Sugawara's point of view, it would have been much better to discuss wedding plans with the heiress of a first-class enterprise. Of course, looks and family background were not the only criteria. Anyone whose family background could exert great influence in the diplomatic field would also be desirable. For instance, someone who had connections with the great economic powers of Western Europe, and so on. In any case, Sugawara had been using the excuse of work to avoid Sherry, but he had not expected to meet her here. House Tuori must have been quite something to bring a 12-year-old girl to this event. No, the one I shouldn't be underestimating is this young lady. Sugawara sighed as he felt a bout of dizziness come over him. At the same time, he felt like he was being bound by something. Sherry drew closer to him, and said in a voice like throwing a tantrum, "I haven't seen you much recently, I've been feeling really lonely. I've been busy recently. After all, my work is my priority. I hope you'll understand." "What, I'm so happy. I always thought you treated our meetings as work. But little did I know you started taking them as personal meetings. I'm so happy to hear that." No, that's not what I mean." Sugawara tried to keep Sherry from hugging him, but the girl before him would not be denied. "I'm so glad every time I see you. But this must be boring for you, is it not, Sugawara-sama?" As Sherry said this, she grabbed Sugawara's hand and pressed it to her developing chest. Now that she had him in his grasp like that, there was no escape. "Or does this mean you're already tired of me? Okasama told me that no matter what kind of feelings I had for a man, I should not cross that final line. If not, he would treat me coldly. Sugawara-sama's been so cold to me, that must be why, right? It's not like that. Sherry-san, please don't say things in public that will damage people's reputations." Sugawara lifted up his unpinned hand and frantically waved it to indicate no. "Ah, that's wonderful."
ジン、焦りすぎよ。ここで迎えるって話じゃなかったの？風魔竜は場外でも活動しているようだ。あったらなるべく早く。焦る必要はないわ。私も協力するから。
代理団長様、連れてきたぞ。と、ここまでの経緯はこんな感じだ。
なるほど。モンドへようこそ。風と共に訪れし旅人よ。私は代理団長のジン。こちらはリサ、騎士団の図書館司書だ。あら、人手不足を手伝いに来た良い子ちゃんかしら。かわいいわね。ただタイミングがあまり良くないわ。風魔竜が目覚めてからずっとこのモンド周辺をうろついているの。ここ一帯に大きな混乱をもたらしているわ。おまけに今のモンドは元素の流れと地脈の循環が子猫ちゃんが遊んだ後の毛糸玉みたいになっていてね。魔法使いにとっては最悪な状況よ。肌も気分も調子悪いわ。それがなければ尋ね人の張り紙を出すよりも騎士団がもっと効率のいい方法で君たちを助けられるのだが、もうしばらくモンドにとどまっていてくれ。セピロス騎士団が問題を解決してみせるから。
おい、サボるなよ。オイラたちも手を貸すべきだぞ。
じゃあ作戦を練るとするか。
風魔竜がモンドに攻めてきたことで逆に災いを集結させるきっかけを与えてくれた。それとリサの魔法で探査したところ、モンドを包む暴風の源が分かったんだ。
ほう、どこなんだ？
放棄された四風守護の神殿よ。風魔竜があの暴風を引き起こせたのはそこに残った力のせいなの。私たちの目標は放棄された4つの神殿のうちこの3つだ。3つだけの理由についてはみんなも分かっていると思うが。
わからないんだけど。
セピロス騎士のみんな、時間は限られている。暴風が猛威を振るっている今、守るだけでは意味がない。この災害がさらなる拡大をする前に神殿の遺跡へと向かおう。
私と組むの？先に言っておくけど、初心者に合わせてペースを落とすようなことはしないよ。ジンさんがいれば安心できる。そう言いたいとこだけど、そればっかり言ってたらダメだよね。だってジンさんはいつも真っ先に動こうとするから、たまにはゆっくり休んでほしいんだ。そしていつの日かジンさんに私たちがいるから安心してって言えるようになりたいの。私と組むの？先に言っておくけど、初心者に合わせてペースを落とすようなことはしないよ。セピロス騎士団の新人として風に対する理解は必要不可欠だよ。風の翼の上級特訓なら私に任せてね。私と組むの？先に風魔竜の剣、一緒に頑張ろうね。
図書館司書のリサよ。私に聞きたいことでもあるの？かわいい子ちゃん。荒野にいる怪物たちの資料かしら？図書館にたくさんあるわよ。元素による優勢をうまく利用することが勝利をつかむコツね。そうだ、図書館でアルバイトをする気はない？最近雑用、いえ、使い走り、いえ、支援の人手が足りないのよね。図書館司書のリサよ。風魔竜に対抗する方法ね。残念だけど一人じゃかないっこないわ。あの体にある膨大な風の魔力を見ると簡単に倒せるような生物じゃないってことがわかる。時間があったら元素魔法の基礎を教えてあげる。そしたらあなたもその力について少しは理解できると思うわ。
風の翼の扱いがかなりうまかったな。どこで学んだんだ？眼帯。なんだ、俺のことが聞きたいのか？そういえばちゃんとした自己紹介がまだだったな。まあするつもりがなかったというのが正解だが失礼。俺は騎兵隊隊長ガイアだ。今手をつけている問題が解決したらまたゆっくり話そう。いい場所を知っているんだ。話すのにふさわしい場所をな。風の翼の扱いがかなり大団長は今遠征中だ。だから副団長のジンが代わりに団長の仕事を引き継いでいる。これが代理団長と呼ばれる理由さ。大団長がここを出ていくとき5分の4の騎士を連れて行ったから、代理団長に残されたプレッシャーもおのずと5倍になった。そう考えるとジンも大変だよな。風の翼の扱いがかなりうまかったな。ああ、またな。
図書館司書のリサよ。もう行くの？また後でね。
私たちの誘いを受け入れてくれたこと、感謝する、旅人。
風魔竜の体や力の異変に関して確かにおかしな点がたくさんある。しかし騎士団にとって今回の襲撃による余波を落ち着かせることが最優先だ。団長から騎士団を預かっている身として、私は団長、そしてモンドの人々の期待を裏切ることはできない。真相をはっきりさせないと。
私たちの誘いを受け入れてくれたこと、感謝する、旅人。
偵察騎士アンバーが君のことで誤解したと聞いた。彼女は責任を果たそうとしただけだ。どうか許してほしい。そうだ、 時間があったらアンバーと話してみるといい。彼女から元気をもらえるぞ。私たちの誘いを受け入れてくれたこと、協力に感謝する。
I can tell from your words that you know what that legendary final line is, Shugawara-sama. But what does that mean? Okasama's lectured me about it before, but it seems I missed the chance to ask her about it and now I don't know anything about it. Could you tell me, please? I'll make sure to teach you properly. Shugawara shouted, in his heart, of course. Is this proper? Things like that should not be mentioned in front of many ears. The truth is that rumors are like the wind. One cannot see the wind, and people tend to make up things in their minds to fill in what they cannot see. Now, if crude people were to make up things in their own heads and spread them, it would lead to a terrible result. In the end, the lady in question will be worse off for it. Please understand that I am saying this because I am thinking about you. Yes. I know very well that you think about me, Shugawara-sama. Sherry seemed to absorb that lesson politely and sincerely. And then she said, let us meet in private afterwards and talk, then. Promise me. Suddenly, another wave of dizziness came over Shugawara. He grabbed his head and groaned, unable to reject Sherry's invitation. Now, for various reasons, I must now greet the Vice Minister that my future husband serves. Shugawara-sama, please introduce me. What are these various reasons? I won't agree if you can't explain them to me. Shugawara was still desperately trying to avoid the topic of becoming a son-in-law. Don't say that. After all, there's no harm in introducing me, right? But how shall I begin? In any case, please look over there. As Sherry said so, she indicated the Japanese delegation with Vice Minister Shirayuri. As you can see, the people of the Empire are merely clustered together and watching the movements over here. Wouldn't that make this chance to mingle meaningless? Therefore, I shall set an example, and then the others will follow, she said. At the present moment, the gathered nobles surrounded the released prisoners. They had no plans of even speaking to the Japanese, let alone understanding them. An observer would come away the impression that neither side had any intention of speaking to each other. After all, as nations at war, the people from both sides might well have lost people to the armies of the other. From the perspective of the Imperials, this was only natural. Sugawara and the others understood this too, so they also felt that there was no reason for either of them to try too hard to reach out to the other side. Well, this isn't a big problem. The delegates have already spoken with the important people of the Empire, haven't we? Pina's welcome party had been organized for just that purpose. Afterward, all they would have to do was wait for the Emperor to show up, exchange pleasantries, and then the basic formalities of the peace talks would be complete. And then, Sherry wagged her index finger while going CH, CH, CH. How naive you are, Sugawara-sama. To us, the people of the Empire, neon is an unknown quantity. Even a girl like me knows that your country has remarkable culture and frightening military power. However, how much do they know about the people of Neon? I know full well that you are a kind man despite your cool exterior, Sugawara-sama. Of course, that is only limited to the special relationship I enjoy with you. I don't know about the rest of your fellows. In addition, the leader of the Japanese delegates is female, and given the rumors I've heard, there's reason to believe that the women of Neon are incredibly vicious and powerful. I believe everyone is afraid to approach her under the effects of that misconception, fearing that anything they do might invite a brutal beating with fists or feet. Sugawara recalled the brutal melee in front of the Emperor, and the servicewoman who had beaten the Crown Prince half to death with her bare hands. He had been there at the time and remembered the incident vividly. It seems that the events of the night of the earthquake spread like wildfire. The people of the Empire are still worried about how long that peace will last, even if it is achieved. Have you considered that? Humans were creatures that sought to exorcise their fear by force of arms. They are scary, so I must defeat them. This impulse caused a chain reaction that might lead to the seeds of future conflict being sown, such as civil wars and the like. The government of Japan had extended an olive branch to the Empire to avoid that sort of thing. Things being as they are, your efforts ought not be wasted. You need to work harder to achieve a common understanding with us, this girl suggested. That being the case, I, Sherry, shall set a good example. In this way, our countries will take a step toward mutual understanding, and this will be a great help to Sugawara-sama's work here. Sherry batted her eyelashes as she finished, as though to ask Sugawara, how about that? At this point, even Sugawara had to take her proposal seriously. Her words were definitely worthy of consideration. Is she really only 12 years old? In Arnis, there was a girl who looked about as old as her, but who was actually over 900 years old. Could it be Sherry-san is someone like that? Sugawara thought for a moment. The words, high and mighty, or putting on airs, failed to do justice to this girl. Indeed, she was hard to understand. With these thoughts in mind, Sugawara could not help but ask, Sherry-san, were you hit by a truck in a previous life and reincarnated with memories of your past life? After listening to Sugawara, Sherry smiled adorably and said, I have no idea what you're talking about. You're saying strange things, Sugawara-sama. At this point, Sugawara realized that he had been unconsciously affected by Itami. The man's constant babbling of nonsense had left its mark on him, and he cursed his own lack of focus. That being said, this girl called Sherry was wise beyond her years. And in truth, her optimism and vision was difficult for Sugawara to deal with. However, at this point in time, he had to separate his personal feelings from his evaluation of her proposal. Alright, I get it, then let me introduce you. However, don't get it wrong. I may have accepted your proposal, but that doesn't mean I accept you. I understand. I understand your true intentions, Sugawara-sama. Then, I'll leave the rest to you. In search of guidance, Sherry thrust her hand out at Sugawara like a patrician lady. Does she really understand? Sugawara had his doubts, but things being as they are, he had to take Sherry's hand, knowing well what others around him might think. Your Excellency, my name is Sherry, a member of House Tuori, and I am pleased to meet you. Sherry said as she curtsied neatly before Shirayuri. Sugawara could not help but be impressed by her immaculate Japanese and her picture-perfect politeness. However, I have received much of Sugawara-sama's affection. I hope to learn many more exciting things from him in future. As Sherry said this with a blush, Toto and all the other men of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs pierced Sugawara with their needle-sharp gazes. Their eyes seemed to be asking, "What have you done to this girl?" or "Sugawara, you're finished." They seemed to be reveling in their rival's misery. Sherry's words had not only devalued Sugawara in the eyes of others, but they had even put him in one hell of a fix. "Thank you for your inquiry, my lovely young lady. Your Japanese is very good. Your Excellency is most kind. After all, I have only studied phrases suitable for greetings." Sherry's humble attitude, along with the Japanese she had learned in just a few months, reflected on the